Welcome to the Massacre Matinee.
My name is Jerry Cooper, and I am one of the White House boys. Three of my best friends, Billy Joe Burnett, Bobby Lewis, and Jan Woods, wrote this dialogue and song for me. I am one of the remaining White House boys that did not make it to a cold hole in the woods. I want to share with you a true, frightening story. I am one of the lucky ones still living who was taken to that dirty, stinking White House, where some of the White House boys met their death, put in a cold hole in the woods, and are now just being found. 50 or more have been found to date. There are some still living White House boys, friends of mine, who want the truth to finally come out. That cold-hearted killer who thought that he could fool the world. He took those precious children to the White House, breaking every rule. He threw them in a coal hole in the woods without even a thought. That dirty, rotten killer who thought he'd never get caught. He sat in that courtroom, sipping water and wringing his hands. His shifty eyes was that of a lying man. He said he just spanked them. Well, hell, he spanked them to death. Those poor little White House boys, both black and white, are finally being found. I've been working for a long time to expose my White House brothers and all the hell they've been through every night and day. Every story has an ending. God knows I'm almost there. I just want the truth to come out for all of us, my White House brothers. And may God bless us all, the White House boys. Friends, I want to thank you for your time and listening to this very frightening true story, which I am a part of. I have only touched on a small part of what really happened, so I hope you will find out much more by looking up the White House boys on your computer. The world needs to know the truth about this story. I thank you, and may God bless you. I am Jerry Cooper, one of the living White House boys.
Welcome back to the matinee.
Welcome back.
So that was the White House Boys song. I got the audio for that from their YouTube channel. They have a YouTube channel, the official White House Boys on YouTube. And I'll put a link for that video down in the description if you listen to the story and decide you want to know more. Because this one, we've all had cases that got us like really heated. This one kind of got me a little heated. Now,
am I gonna be like punching the air by the end of this?
we might not be punching the air. The thing about this one is a lot of what did happen shouldn't have happened, and a lot of what kept happening could have been prevented. And that's what makes this one.
I'm gonna be punching the air.
You'll be punching the air for sure.
I'm gonna be upset. I'm gonna do angry chicken wings at you and everything probably.
So
people are gonna be confused by that.
If they've listened to our others, they'll know. Yeah. So I'm gonna tell you about the Dozier School for Boys. Originally, the Dozier School for Boys was not called the Dozier School for Boys. It was originally called the Florida State Reform School.
Good old reform schools.
Yeah, so in a 1897 act of legislature, so not even the 1900s, long ass fucking time ago.
Yeah.
They decided we need a reform school. We gotta do something about the youth so that these problem children don't become criminals. It didn't help.
Kids with like
Preemptively.
ADHD and all that kind of stuff that couldn't conform to like society. They were just like, we're problem children, send them away.
We will get to what they described problem children as for sure. But it was overseen in its very, very early years by 5 commissioners that were supposed to like report back. They didn't do a super great job with that. But the doors opened to the campus in Marianna, Florida on New Year's Day of 1900, ringing in the new century with a boys' reform school. So
they really planned that one out. They're like, oh man, it's gonna be the biggest thing ever.
yeah, and originally when the property was purchased for this, they purchased 1,200 acres.
Jesus.
Initially. Keep in mind the timing though, like it would have been way easier to get that much property than it is now.
Oh yeah, because it's still a lot of open land, but like still, that's a lot of 1,200 acres.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. Well, it ended up growing to 1,400 acres through other small purchases of land. I guess a couple hundred acres at a time. You'll see.
Oh, okay.
You'll see. So it was originally overseen by the 5 commissioners who were appointed by then Governor William Bloxham.
Love last
He had
names.
like a 3 name, but I'm going with William Bloxham.
Blocking them haters, sorry.
And the first few years of running this, things were a little bit. It was a new system. They were still trying to figure out what they were trying to do. Early 1900s, so they didn't have a lot of like department of this, department of that kind of stuff within the government hierarchy of the time. It was all still kind of new. So in 1903, because they were trying to do regular inspections and make sure things were going well, in 1903 they did an inspection of the school and they found that the kids were being kept in leg irons, basically shackles.
That reminded me when I went to Duluth and they literally had like shackles an antique store that they wanted like $150 for, and they were like, oh, 1900 shackles. I was like, what?
1900 shackles just for sale.
And
somebody might have
like,
died in those shackles. Give me $100.
I don't know, but it was like the leather bound ones, and I was like, what the fuck, why is there shackles here? Like, what? I know it's an antique store, but like some things you shouldn't,
because why
sell
not
back to the public,
because why not, for funsies.
but still keeping kids in shackles, like, who made that decision? They're like, we just opened,
Well,
we're gonna lock up the kids in shackles.
a little bit of speculation on my part. My wondering is if maybe they didn't want any runaways, because at the time it was a 1,400 acre property. Well, at the time it was a 1,200 acre property.
yeah.
But they didn't have any fences. I still don't think.
I get it.
I still don't think the shackles are necessary,
but
but
just don't treat the kids like shit and make them want to run away. Like,
right.
what?
And I will preemptively say before I get too far into this, I did not write down a lot of notes. I wrote down some notes, and then I found this 117-page report done by, let me find her name real quick. It was written by Aaron Kimmerell, Richard Estabrook, E. Christian Wells, and Antoinette Jackson from the University of South Florida. It was actually their anthropology department that wrote this, and they wrote this when they were doing investigation into claims of the more deaths happening
More
there
deaths
than were necessarily reported. So I've got a lot of really good, really solid, really well-researched information in that regard, and I will make sure that there is a link in the description for where this is also available to you. I have it on my phone right now.
Like, why rewrite all of the information down then if it's conveniently, and it's thank you for doing all of that.
And I'm not doing like a word for word thing, but I'm hitting some highlights because there is a lot of really detailed information in here. For example, they were actually able to find the reports for some of the inspections. So in the 1903 inspection, they said, quote, "We found them in irons just as common criminals, which in the judgment of your committee is not the meaning of a state reform school. We have no hesitancy in saying that under its present management, it is nothing more or less than a prison where juveniles are confined." And this was a letter to Frank Adams, President of the Senate, from the Legislative Investigation Committee, because they called for an investigation of the school after already, just in the first few years, getting reports of abuse and mistreatment.
They were only open for, 3 years at that point?
At that point, yeah.
And they're already putting kids in shackles?
At that point, yeah. Now, there were also multiple people throughout history that also did, like, research investigations into the Dozier School.
Yeah.
So I am going to be getting some information from them as well. One of them was, I don't know what his first name was. It's in here, but for the purpose of time, I'm not going to go hunting for it. But his last name was Lundrigan, and he wrote his report in 1975. Now, in his report, he found research, like old records and things. And one of the ones that he found was from 1909, talking about how the schoolrooms were in very poor condition and without desks. The inventory as listed in the biennial report was falsified because the commissioners were expected to report the situation every 2 years.
Yeah.
So every other year they would send something up to the committee and they'd make sure everything was hunky-dory.
Oh, yeah.
So he was, in 1909 even, they were like, yeah, so a lot of the stuff that they're telling us is going on in there is not what's going on in there. And
so they're just
lying
corrupt
about
from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez.
And a lot of the boys that were ending up in there, because it was typically meant to be like a short stay thing, like we're going to set you straight and then put you back in the world. They were keeping some of the boys at that point until they were like 20, and you weren't supposed to be in there after you were 18, kind of situation.
Well, yeah, even in that time, once you hit like 15, you're almost considered an adult, almost.
Pretty
like,
much.
Basically.
Pretty much. So in 1911, only 2 years later after that, they found that, and they had done some management changes. Mm-hmm. So they kind of restructured at a certain point. Originally it was the 5 commissioners, and then they decided, things aren't really going the way that they need to. We need to kind of like figure this out. So they set up a committee specifically for it. It was later on overseen by the governor himself, and he had a cabinet of people that were acting as like the board of commissioners for Florida state institutions.
Oh, so kind of like
and
a
then
school
they ended
board,
up
essentially.
and then they ended up establishing like a proper board of commissioners kind of thing for that. So in 1911, when they were doing some looking into things again, they found that at times the superintendent Morgan at the time at the school, he was quote, unnecessarily and brutally punishing, and the instrument of punishment was a leather strap fastened to a wooden paddle. And they said that ultimately, because it was early 1900s, so things were segregated. So you're going to hear me say black kid, white kid a lot. Yeah. It's not meant to be a race thing. You literally need this information to properly tell the story, because there was such a difference in how everybody was being treated based on that. So they did say in their reports that, quote, the Negro school impressed your committee as being more in nature of a convict camp than anything else we can think of. So if you were a black kid in the Dozier school, you were basically in Auschwitz.
Jesus.
But without the gas chamber, because they didn't need it, because they had other ways. Like
Auschwitz before it was Auschwitz.
Like fucked.
Damn.
So in 1913 again, and because it's the biennial reports every couple of years, health conditions were bad, and one member of the board would not accept the biennial report because they knew it was falsified, kind of thing. And that was when the governor was kind of like, hey, what's going on, sort of thing. So that's when they started to establish the Board of Commissioners and the Florida State
like finally
Institution.
actually being like, well, maybe we should actually get a handle on this because
and initially
do this right.
In the beginning, it was just a general state reform school, so they did have both boys and girls. And at a certain point, 1914, they changed their name to the Florida Industrial School for Boys. They started putting that hard down. Okay, this is just going to be for boys. We'll send girls somewhere else, kind of thing. Like, and they had people in the early years of the school, like as young as 3, like young.
He's not eating his food. To the reform school you go.
Like, oh,
right.
He peed in his diaper. Oh.
So they had a broad variety of reasons to be sent there, and those reasons included things like theft, murder, incorrigibility, which I looked that up. Incorrigibility is defined as a child who is disobedient to reasonable and lawful commands of a parent or guardian. Or
go
basically
sit
an
over
authority
there.
Picture.
No.
Like,
whoa.
Exactly. So that's considered incorrigibility. You could get sent there for that. You could get sent there for smoking cigarettes, for skipping school, for running away from home. Are you ready for this one?
Oh no.
For being an orphan.
You got no fucking parents because you need to be reformed.
It was for no reason
why
other
your parents
than
died.
we don't have anywhere else to send this kid. Nobody wants him.
Orphanage? Like,
You'd think.
you need to be reformed.
I told
Your
you this was
parents
gonna get
died.
you heated.
You already got the chicken wings.
I already got the chicken. Check that off my list. So
I can't believe that these people went big brain and they're like, I can't get over this. The fact that they're like, oh, your parents died. Well, I guess you need to be reformed because it's your fucking fault. Unless that like the kid actually like murdered them, then like double whammy, murder and being an orphan.
yeah, it wasn't typically. I can't say for all, but it wasn't typically that situation.
Could you imagine like what like your parents just died and then they're just like, well, we don't have anywhere to put you, so we're just gonna put you to hell on earth. I hope that's okay. Like,
well, the problem ended up becoming that they didn't have enough room for as many boys as they had because.
So then why are they taking the orphans?
Exactly. We'll get to that.
God damn.
So in that 1913 report, it was talking about how, things are kind of falling apart already.
Dude, they've only been open for like 13 years. 13 years, and they're already just like, oh shit, man. We're not doing so hot.
So the conditions didn't change. Overcrowding was bad.
Of course not.
Especially on the black side of campus. They had a north side and a south side, but it was white side of campus, black side of campus.
Yeah.
So boys at the time of the overcrowding in 1913, now national standard called for 600 cubic inches of airspace. Just personal space for each person, for each boy. They were lucky to get 200. At the time of peak overcrowding, they slept 2 to a regular bed, 4 to a bunk bed, so 2 boys to a mattress. You didn't have a choice, especially on the black side because they got treated the worst because of the times. So all of that happens. Governor decides, we gonna fix some things. So they change up the management a little bit. They change the name of the school. They had at one point kind of gotten some no-nos against them for not having like proper safety standards. So in that 1913 report, it also mentioned how they didn't have sufficient routes of egress in the situation of a fire because some of the dorms that they were staying in were multiple floors and they had bars on the windows and one door. So they're like, you gotta make this a little bit safer. So they're like, okay. We'll make it safer. And they did some stuff. I don't know if they actually did some stuff or they just said they did some stuff, but they
falsified or some shit like that.
They did some stuff. And in 1914, a fire killed 8 white boys and 2 staff members in the white boys' dormitory because they never actually did some stuff. They got trapped in there. Now, based on race, they segregated everybody for work as well.
Yeah.
because they were like, well,
guess who
if
got the
they're gonna
harder
be
shit
here,
to do?
they gotta have something to do. They gotta earn their keep. So we'll take all these black boys and we'll put them out in the fields and they'll grow crops and harvest crops and
Of fucking course they did
and
that.
take care of the animals and we'll take the white boys and we'll teach them woodworking and machinery. And so they're manufacturing things. One of the earliest quote unquote companies that ran on the property was a brick making business. They would just make bricks. They were making like 20,000 bricks a day, I think it was at one point.
I
like
wish people
bricks.
could see the faces I'm making.
The faces you're making are spectacular. They really are.
Of fucking course they made the black kids go out and work the fucking fields and they taught the white boys woodworking and, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, making bricks, not easy. Not easy. It is
Not
a rough
easy
art.
at all. And I'm not sure if that was one that was like segregated or not, or
Probably was.
it probably was, because they were teaching all the white boys the trade jobs and teaching all the black
ones that,
boys.
hey, when you move
Yeah.
on from this, you can actually do stuff. Okay, obviously, like farming, good qualities to have.
If you have property.
Yeah, but let's just teach the white boys all the good stuff that'll get them nice paying jobs once they're out of here.
Right.
We're gonna fuck them up and traumatize them, but hey, at least they'll get paid good.
Right. And a lot of the stuff that they made there ended up getting shipped off and sold off elsewhere. Boys didn't get paid for it. And
No.
why would they pay the boys for it? So they're making all these bricks and they're shipping all these bricks off and they're making all this money and it should be going back into the school, but it's not going back into the school. And they're also making the bricks to make their own buildings because they're like, well, we've got all these businesses going now. We need more boys to do more work. So let's build more buildings and bring in more boys.
Child labor.
That's exactly what it was. It was free child labor under the
Oh,
guise
man,
of we're
have
going to
you
set you straight.
Seen some of the states that are trying to repeal child labor laws.
I can see like 16, 17 working an 8-hour day on the weekends if they really want to.
Yeah, but they're trying
But-
to make it to where like you can be like fucking like 11 or some shit like
No.
that and get a job in some places.
No. Well, depends on the job. I would have an 11-year-old busser.
Yeah, if it's like, okay, come in for like 3 hours.
Yeah.
No more than that. No more than like 3 or 4 because
It shouldn't be something that you teach a kid to hate so young.
yeah, but I mean school's a thing and that's already teaching them because you'd be like, that's your job. It's your job to make sure this is done, this is done, this is done. Like in some ways, yes, it is. But if you do a job kind of thing with it, it just makes people like believe. But like it just makes them think like, oh, this is shitty. Like I'm not getting
Right.
paid for it, so therefore I don't want to do it.
Exactly.
So it's like, yeah,
Kind of counterproductive.
don't call it a job.
But so
Make
the
it
bricks
fun.
that they were using, they were making, they were using to make their own buildings. The
Mhm.
boys are building the buildings.
Oh my god, they're making them contractors.
Yeah, so they're doing all kinds of stuff. And at one point, they did actually end up opening their own little like newspaper, and it was just kind of
Newsies.
released. It was just kind of released locally, I guess. And that started a little bit later on in like 1920s. And it was originally called The Light, but they ended up changing it to The Yellow Jacket. And some of the information that is actually reference information for this case comes from their very own newspaper, because at a certain point they would like talk about students dying and things like that.
They ratted themselves out. Are you kidding?
Well, it was the students that were making the papers.
Oh shit, so the kids are just like throwing
And-
help me.
And those
signs
papers
into
were
the-
going out to the community. But when it came to things like letters to the parents and stuff like that, they were kind of like forced to write certain things. And their mail was gone through, and so they were
We don't
told they
give a
had
shit
to
what you could write
they
out
were
to
told
the
they had to write
public.
on there that they were having a great time, and if they didn't, they wouldn't send it.
Makes no sense. It's so back-ass, it's like awkward.
Yeah,
Back
super
ass.
fucking sketch.
Was there a tuition fee for this?
I don't see.
Because I would. I mean,
At one point there was a $50 fee paid by the county that would send, let's see, in a quote from the research that Lundrigan did, the managers are thoroughly convinced that the $50 fee, which law requires to be paid for the maintenance of each child, committed by the county from which they were committed. So like the county that said, that's it, you have to go there.
just a one-time $50 fee.
Yeah, they would have to. Oh, they would have to pay $50 for each child sent to the school. But they were trying to kind of like get rid of that.
I was gonna say, if they're like making, because like obviously reform schools were kind of all over the country, and they were really big in like the 70s. A lot of places were paying like 10 grand per kid just to send them to these places just to get fucking tortured, basically.
Well, I believe it was a one-time $50 fee, because the argument was, at the time, the county that sent someone to jail would get a $250 payment. You sent someone to jail, here's some money. And they didn't want to have to pay $50 to send a kid to reform school when they could just send him to jail.
They want to get
So that's
paid.
why they were kind of like, maybe we should get rid of this fee thing going on. So that's when the businesses kind of started going, okay, well, you guys got to start like singing for your supper.
Yeah.
So in 1918, that was the height of the Spanish flu. Now, one of the big problems about this school is because they falsified their biennial report, it's also very, very likely that they falsified a lot of their records, including their death records.
Oh, there's no way they didn't.
So it's not completely known how many kids actually died on the property. However, in 1918, they did put in their report that, quote, 11 black boys, well, they said the not so nice word, for black boys, died of the Spanish flu. They did not give names or information on these boys, just that 11 boys died of Spanish flu.
Wait, did they casually just like give the hard R of talking about them dying?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I know in that time frame,
in their
it was
official,
a little
in their
bit
official
more...
record keeping.
Like, that's worse. That's way worse.
Like,
I know
quote,
in that time,
Negro
that word
would have been one thing, but like, hard R.
Like, if you use Negro, okay, like, in that time frame, that is how they were referred to. Obviously, today, that is not the case, but in that time, that is what was socially acceptable. Obviously, not by the blacks, but like, you know, but just casually going hard R.
Yeah.
Talking about kids dying. Okay, all right. I'm already heated, and we're only 30 minutes into this. We haven't even gotten to like
we
the
haven't
chunk.
even hit all of it yet.
Oh man,
my dear panda.
I'm gonna have an aneurysm by the end of this.
I won't let that happen, I promise. So between 1919 and 1925, 5 boys died with no recorded cause of death. Now, that's not to say that only 5 boys died, just that they didn't have a reported cause of death. The thing that is particularly intense, I would say, about this 117-page report is that they have a lot of information on here about things like names and causes of death and stuff like that that were done through the reports. Like, all of that information is accessible. So I really do, I'm going to put the link in the down below for this. I really do encourage you, if this is something that interests you, to look into this more, because there was a lot, like a lot.
Even just to say for like us, not really time-wise, but for them to actually have justice done to them, it'd be best to just go look at that document. It
truly would, and there are going to be some names that I bring up in particular, but there's so many, I would not have time to say all of them, and a lot of
3 hours,
yeah,
long episode for that, and we do not have that time.
Yeah, so the way that these names are separated out on the report is by this entire report was about the cemetery, so things are separated by like burial locations. So there were individuals that were documented as, we buried this person here on the property. There were the boys that died in the fire along with the 2 adults. They were buried on the property. They were recorded as being buried on the property. Everyone that died in that fire was white. There were 3 black boys after that were buried on the property but given no cause of death or an unknown cause of death. There were also 11 the 11 boys in 1918 of the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
They were also buried on the property, although they were not. There was no information about where they were buried, what their names were, how old they were. They weren't keeping very good records of like when kids were getting admitted into the system, if you will. So in 1922, there was a white boy that died of influenza. And then after that is 8 black boys between 1922 and 1932. But some of these causes of death that they give, like, there's a couple that are unknown. There's one that was a drowning. There's a couple that were pneumonia. One of them was tuberculosis. One of them was influenza. One of them was traumatic rupture of the lung. Yeah. Not quite sure about that one either.
That one would probably make more sense with like a tuberculosis and pneumonia thing, because if you're coughing so hard, you can rupture your lungs, which is interesting.
But it could have also been from abuse.
Physical
It's kind
trauma.
of hard to tell. There was a lot of pneumonia and influenza still for a while. There was a white boy that died of a hernia. There was a colored boy that died of knife wounds. There's blunt trauma to the head. There's... The thing about it is, on all of these death records, they made a point to say if they died after escaping, they would put escaped / blah, blah, blah with the cause of death. Just to emphasize, they weren't here when it happened, but this is how they died.
It wasn't our fault, we swear.
Right. One of those was George Owen Smith, who is brought up in this. And I will get back to some more of the burial names and things like that, but we're going to talk about George Owen Smith for a second. George Owen Smith died in 1941. Now, he was 14 years old when he was sent to the school for quote-unquote auto theft in 1940. Now, he escaped, but he got caught and brought back. And they kind of forced you to write these letters and things. And in one of the letters that he sent home, he said that he got what he had coming. They brought him back and they beat his ass.
Yeah.
How dare you escape kind of thing. And he ended up running away again. And they found him a couple months later underneath a house. Yeah.
Like
now,
crawled under a house and died kind of a thing?
That's pretty much it. So they actually have photocopies of the letters that the school sent to his mother. After he escaped, January 1st of 1941, they sent her a letter that said, "This is to acknowledge the receipt of your letter of recent date written with regard to your son George Owen, and to advise you that so far we have been unable to get any information concerning his whereabouts. He escaped. We don't know where he went."
Yeah.
And afterwards, she received a letter from, I guess, the pastor. There was a local pastor that would, like, come out to the school and do stuff kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he sent a letter of, like, reassurance trying to make her feel better because...
Her kid's missing.
At that point, they did find him.
Oh, okay.
They found him, and the pastor was like, "Oh, I'm going to give you these scriptures and things and try and make you feel better." And when they went to retrieve George Owen's body, they just kind of pointed at a pile of dirt and said, "He's in there." He was so decomposed, it didn't matter. We just buried him. So they couldn't even bring him home, even though they went there to pick up his body. So, like, his family had to, like, fight to get his body, which that shouldn't be a thing.
No. But also, it's such a red flag if a school has a cemetery in front of it or on the property with it. That's when you just know that, like, this is not a good place.
Right. So he had run away in November, and they found him at the end of January. And this is in Florida, so it's not like he froze to death kind of thing necessarily. Yeah. The coroner's inquest in the sheriff's office responded to it, so it was like a city thing, I guess. They responded to it. They didn't really autopsy him because he was so decomposed, because he'd probably been under there for quite a while.
Yeah.
And George Owen was not the first. He was not the last, which is pretty fucking sad to say. And like I said before, there was all kinds of, like, age variety
Yeah, because I bet it was like from like
Yeah.
toddler to basically adult.
Well, the incredible age variety did not matter when it came to people that died either.
Yeah.
The youngest two that died there were both 6 years old. 6 years old. So the first one, and this is where I'm going to start telling a little bit more. A lot of the names that I'm going to mention are people that are not here anymore.
Okay.
George Grissom was 6 years old when he died. He was brought in February of 1917 with his brother Ernst. They were both black boys, and they were both charged with delinquency from Washington County, and they were sent there, quote, until 21 years old. Now, according to one of their reports, they said that the boys were paroled for 16 months after arriving, I guess, at a certain point, and George was brought back unconscious. He never woke up. They don't know where he was buried. They just have a record of him dying there. Yeah. There was no record of what happened to his brother other than a few months later a while later, I should say, in 1919, he was just marked as not being there anymore.
Yeah. Okay, he's probably in a field.
He very well probably is. The next 6-year-old who died there was George W. Chansey Jr. I'm going to give him every bit of respect that a name like that deserves. He was brought into the program in 1923 for dependency. Explain to me what the fuck that is.
You're too dependent on your mother.
Maybe
Time
he was,
to be reformed.
Maybe he was an orphan. I'm not sure. He was brought in, and 23 days after he arrived, he died of malaria. Not sure how he got malaria in Florida. I mean, even at the times, I don't think malaria would have been that common in Florida.
They got a lot of mosquito population. A lot of trading was happening then after the World War.
He was not actually an orphan. His ledger states that his casket was shipped home to his father. So
the malaria one I can kind of understand because Florida a lot of mosquitoes and like with trade routes, it just takes one bite.
11-year-old Schley Hunter. He was brought in 1916. He died 5.5 years later in 1922. He was also brought in for delinquency and expected to stay until he was 21 years old. And the only thing that it really says is that he was paroled at the end of August in 1921, and he returned April of the following year very ill with a fever of 104, and he died the next day. So a lot of them, they're trying to say, you know, they went somewhere, they got sick, they got something, I don't know what happened, and then they just came back and they died here.
You know what bothers me is that the fact that they're going like, well, we paroled these kids. Like,
Well, they were expecting a lot of this stuff to be like short stays. There is actually a list on here of people that died within 90 days of their arrival. One of those was George Owen Smith, who died under the house.
Yeah.
One of those was Robert Gerald Hewitt. His was in 1960. He was actually shot in the chest during his escape. The thing about it is, a lot of the townspeople and a lot of the cops, when they would get a report, oh, so-and-so escaped, one of the boys escaped, they'd go out with their shotguns and be like, well, better dead than escaped. The faces.
Okay.
Frog, be happy you left. Honestly, you'd be so heated, this would be a 3-hour episode.
Oh, God.
Yeah. There's some that died, just from the anesthesia from surgeries.
They were doing surgeries on the kids in here?
Not like experimental surgeries, like legitimate surgeries.
Yeah, but still, they're doing surgeries. A lot of what
they were saying was that they had a real doctor. One of the people that actually talked in... There was a documentary. I didn't watch the documentary, unfortunately, but there's a lot of reference videos on YouTube and stuff like that. EWU, Explore With Us, they did a video on YouTube. That's actually what introduced me to the Dozier School.
Yeah.
and there was some of the white boys would like assist. They would be like they wouldn't help with the surgery, but they like set up the table and keep things clean and like help clean wounds of boys that were healing and make sure that they were able to go to the bathroom and help give them a bath and stuff like that. Like,
okay, like that. Okay,
they weren't doing the surgical stuff.
but still, it's the fact that they're doing surgeries there and not at a hospital that bothers me.
There was a boy that died from a traumatic lung rupture after he fell off a mule. I don't know how falling off a mule ruptured his lung, but
Unless he got stepped on.
there were a lot of guys that died making multiple attempts to escape. There was one called Guy Hudson who he was brought in July 15th of 1921. He escaped overnight from the 18th to the 19th, escaped overnight from the 21st to the 22nd, and then escaped again on the 27th, but he was caught the same day. On the third day, on the 27th, he escaped. He was caught and brought back the same day, and 18 days later, he drowned at the local lake. There were some that died as little as 10 days after being brought there. There were some that were reported in the school paper. There were some that were not reported in the school paper. There were some that were hit by cars or got into car accidents or got into fights with other boys and
Any
got
way
murdered
that you
by
can
other
die,
boys.
a kid fucking died by it at this school.
Yeah.
That's
For example, Oscar Elvis Murphy, hell of a name. He was 15 years old. He died November of 1932 after escaping the school. They always emphasized whether or not they escaped.
it doesn't fucking matter.
It does not matter. It really does not. Oscar had made a few different attempts to escape, but according to the ledger, his death was the result of an auto accident. He had been brought in for incorrigibility, fuck the establishment, right, in 1932, and he was expected to stay until he was legally discharged. So basically, he had to stay until they said, okay, you can go.
You're fixed.
They could keep him forever if they wanted to. Now, he was actually accidentally hit by a car during his escape, which fractured his hip, and he ended up like dying as resulting infection, I'm guessing. Because
Yeah,
of the
you can
times.
get septic from that kind of thing.
And just some of these are just insane. Like Robert Gerald Hewitt, I mentioned him earlier.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read this section of the report as a direct quote. This is the interim report on Boot Hill Cemetery, page 71, all the way at the bottom, the last bullet point. Robert Gerald Hewitt was a 16-year-old white boy who entered FIS on 3/22/1960. The ledgers confirm that he was admitted and then on March 25th was temporarily released to the Jackson Hospital, and he returned the following day, and then on April 2nd he ran away. The ledger and death certificate indicate that he died 2 days later on April 4th. All of this information comes from the Daily Ledger, as the record ledgers for this time are not public record. His death certificate states that his manner of death is unknown, and his cause of death is gunshot wounds in the chest inflicted by person or persons unknown. Witness accounts about the circumstances surrounding his death report that he was found shot with a 12-gauge shotgun. Family believed that he was shot by someone who came looking for him following his escape. So it was literally just someone saying, somebody got out, let's go get him, boys. He was actually buried with his mother, who preceded him in death.
Oh, man. I don't even have words.
Right. Now, some of them died, like Michael Smelly was a 17-year-old boy who died on 3/15 of 1966, just a few months before my mama was born. His death indicates that he died of carcinoma of the spine and lungs. He supposedly had a history of carcinoma. In 65, he had a tumor removed from his spine. He basically died of cancer in the school, so I can't necessarily blame the school for that.
Yeah. That's like the only one that they could probably easily write off as not them, because you can't really didn't really have much that they could do with that kind of stuff.
Right. But there's also the case of Billy Jackson, who was a 13-year-old colored boy who was admitted for running away from home and theft. He was sentenced for a year and he ended up dying of, if I can pronounce that, pyelonephritis, I guess. It's basically a urinary tract infection that ascended to his kidneys. And one of the things that can cause that is trauma, so it's like, well, did they beat him up so bad that he couldn't pee anymore?
I mean, it's also with that kind of a thing. If you just let a urinary tract infection go for so long, it'll crawl its way up to your kidneys.
True, which, I mean, I guess just goes to show even more that
They were neglecting him and not helping him or giving him antibiotics for that kind of a thing. Because, one, you know, he was complaining about it hurting to go to the bathroom and all of that kind of stuff. So there was neglect.
And even if he
there.
did complain, I don't necessarily think it would have mattered.
Mm-mm.
There's one particular guy that they talked about a lot, especially the White House boys talked about a lot, known as Tidwell. Tidwell had one arm, and I say had because he died of old age. He was basically the meanest son of a bitch there, and he would just beat them all mercilessly. I do apologize for the length of this episode, but I really do feel like kind of giving some more of that information was important. As of 2012, they found 55 graves in this official graves, 27 hidden graves in the forest around the property, and 98 deaths documented. But it's very highly believed that there were more bodies buried on that property, like very heavily believed. And this episode it's got me so heated that I can't even, that's probably gonna come across.
Oh, yeah.
This episode's just so fucking heated. It's got me so fucking heated that, like, my brain's all over the place, so I do apologize for that, and I'll try and fix some stuff in editing if I can. But they did very little to fix the problems that were going on in these schools. They made changes to the staff in the later years. They thought they were fixing it by, like, swapping people out, but they really weren't. And all things considered, a lot of the stories that you hear about the Dozier school, a lot of the abuse, there was abuse the entire time, but a lot of the abuse seemed to be at its worst in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And that's where the White House boys comes about. And the White House boys were basically like survivors.
Yeah.
There was this one property called the White House it was one house on the property called the White House. It was the only thing the only part in the entire thing that had fencing right off the bat, because they figured if someone's really bad, we'll just put them in there.
Basically like solitary confinement, essentially.
Right, but ultimately it came down to, if I want to beat your ass, I'm going to beat your ass in there. And a lot of the boys that survived these situations and talked about it after the fact talked about how they'd go in there and they'd flip on this really loud industrial fan so they couldn't hear the screams. And they'd tell you to lay down on this cot and grab onto the rail and don't let go of the rail, and you bite the pillow and you don't move, and you'll get your 10 licks and then you'll be out of here, or your 20 licks or your 30 licks or your 50 licks, however many they wanted. And I say licks, I mean beatings, I mean whips.
Yeah.
And if you'd move your hand or let go of the rail or anything that pissed them off, they would start over. And a lot of the boys said that you could see blood and bits of tongue and bits of lip from them, like biting their lip and biting their tongue so hard from a lot of these beatings. And every single one that I heard interviewed talked specifically about two things. One of them being that the springs on the bed would give way, so every hit would just drive you down a little bit.
Yeah.
And just push you into the bed a little bit more. And the other thing that they mentioned, and I believe it was about Tidwell, but I can't remember specifically, but when they'd bring their arm up to whip, you could hear it scrape the ceiling, so you'd know about a half a second before it hit, and they would just put their all into some of those hits. Now, the thing about getting heated about this is I do have to realistically talk about both sides of it, because there are a lot of boys that came out of this school for boys, which I didn't mention earlier. It became the Dozier School for Boys after Alfred believe it was Alfred G. Dozier. He was one of the superintendents of the school, and they were like, "Oh, such an honor. We'll name this school after you," kind of thing. Some of the boys that came out of this school do feel like they got what they deserved and they were better men after having gone through this. Some of the boys that went into this school were beaten mercilessly and came out of it alive. Some of them didn't make it off the property.
I feel like that's where you can tell who was treated the worst and who wasn't, and like were the favorites kind of a thing, and they were like, "Oh, well, yeah, this wasn't that bad," and then just completely ignoring the kids. And it's not to say that it was just the black boys that were getting beaten. No. There are just as many white boys on that list as there are black boys that died and were buried on that property or shot. There was one that was a boy that escaped that was legitimately just shot in the head by a sheriff. Rather than taking the time to figure out what's going on and help this person, they just... He's an escapee. Bam! Like, what? They were treated. These boys were sent there to become better people and to fix their problems, and they were treated like prisoners. Do I feel like some of them probably needed to be there and get that extra little oomph? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But some of the reports, I mean, they would send them for whatever fucking reason they wanted, right? So some of them were just they had a touch of the tism. And some of the reports in the investigations, they were like, look, if somebody's got like an issue, like you shouldn't send them here. They need more help than this place can offer them. And the people that were running the place were just treating it like a free labor mill, free child labor. Make, do. And some of them, there wasn't always really sufficient like meals and things at certain points, even though they were growing a lot right there. Literally a concentration camp. Literally. Without the fucking gas and everything like that. Yeah, and the thing that makes it crazy, and this is where I'll bring in our snack, is quite a few of the boys, when they showed up, they looked at that property and they got out of the car or whatever that they were getting brought there in, especially in the later years, and they're like, man, this place really looks nice. It looks like a summer camp. I think I'm going to have a lot of fun here. And then the next day, they're just getting beat to shit. And the next day, they're getting beat to shit. And you know, I wish it could have been the summer camp that it looked like it was supposed to be, because that would have made me feel a little bit better about s'mores and cocoa being our snack for today, but it's also kind of cold, so I wanted s'mores and cocoa. Yeah. We need something to make us feel good after this. I really did need something to make myself feel good after this. There was some minimally okay-ish news that came out of it. See, the thing is, the school opened in 1900. The school remained open until 2011. It was 111 years old. The Dozier School for Boys, 111 years of state-sponsored torture. Okay. All right. Here, let me say this. If it was like, oh, we shut it down in the 90s, because that's when like they really started reforming a whole bunch of shit, and really like they just got out of the 80s, and they're like, you know what, this shit ain't working. There were still boys there in 2011 that got sent to other places when it closed. Now I'm gonna leave all of these silence gaps in this little part right after I told her. I'm leaving these silence gaps so you can understand how shook she is right now. I'm not gonna lie, man. I'm on like the verge of tears for this one, because I hate reform schools like this. I fucking hate it. I hate them, and there's some of them that I wanted to get into, and there probably will be an episode that we'll just talk about a bunch of different reform schools, because the fact that there were so many and so many ended up like this, I think there was only a handful of ones that were actually legitimate, that didn't turn into these kind of things. The thing about this, and I was wrong, it was the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys. Arthur G. Dozier was actually the superintendent from like the 40s until I want to say like the 60s or 70s. So he was the superintendent at its worst. Oh, and they honored him for it. We want to name this after you. Woo. Fuck off. And that's when a lot of these White House boys were there. It was like 60s, 70s, and they're actually dying a lot. The guy that sang the song and did the little speech in the beginning was Jerry Cooper. He was the former president of the White House Boys group.
He actually died in, I want to say it was 2022.
Okay, at least he saw the close of it.
It was either 2022 or 2012. It ended in a 2. One of the two. I believe it was 2022. And the only thing that he said was that he wanted to stay alive long enough to make sure that Tidwell died, and Tidwell actually died the year before him. The one-armed man.
He lived up to his word.
He lived up to his word, indeed. But in 2008, they actually, Governor Charlie Crist, he directed the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to investigate the unmarked graves, because there was unmarked graves on the property. And 2008, so the school wasn't even closed yet. And all of that was at the request of the White House boys. They got together and they started saying, we need to do something about this. People need to know about this.
So was the abuse still happening, or was there a point in time where new people got in and there was like a hard switch of like, now we're doing legitimate shit, or was it still shady all the way up until it's closed?
As far as I can tell, it was still shady all the way up until it was closed, because at that point it had a 100-year tradition to upkeep, and oh boy, Americans and their traditions, you gotta keep them sometimes. Now, in this investigation that they did, the report for the investigation was released in 2010. So in that investigation, they talked to former students of varying types. Some of them said, well, my experience wasn't that bad. Some of them said it was fucking awful. A lot of them said, well, I don't have any permanent scarring. Some of them said, well, this scar could either be from my beatings or it could be because I was in Vietnam. I'm not quite sure, kind of thing. So it's a little bit...
I'm sorry, could you imagine being in this school and then you get fucking shipped out to Nam?
Honestly, like, I personally couldn't. A fair amount of the survivors, I'll say survivors, of the abuse at the Dozier school did end up becoming soldiers and things. A fair amount of them ended up becoming career criminals. So, I mean, the school, whether or not they went to the school doesn't seem like it made a difference. The school was obviously doing some things wrong. Even if the student, we'll say student, but a lot of the times, sometimes they felt like inmates, obviously. A lot of the kids, I should say, the boys, even if they died of a quote-unquote natural cause, like pneumonia, influenza, things that the school can't necessarily control.
Especially in that time, because they didn't really know a whole lot about germs.
That doesn't necessarily mean they had to be so sketchy about the burials. And some of the boys that died there were legitimately murdered by other boys.
Right, like if there was ones that are like legitimately murdered by other people, or they died from a sickness, like kind of report those, because that just kind of comes with having a bunch of people in a building in one place. Like,
right.
There's gonna be sickness.
The fact of the matter is there were sketchy practices that they were trying to cover up, which meant they already had shady record keeping. So what proof is there then that those boys died the way they said they did? And that's what I liked about that 117-page report, is they were very intensely trying to figure out any existing family members of anyone, and they were sending out things saying, you know, if you know someone that potentially went to this, like, to this school, or if you had someone that went to this school and you just never heard from them again, like, come talk to us, like, give us some DNA, maybe we can match you to one of these bodies that we've found, kind of thing, because they weren't all named. They're not all of the boys that ended up going there ended up getting, like, put into the record books.
Right.
So, I mean...
Did they ever, like, end up finding, like, anyone who had died that they didn't know had actually died on the property, or was, like, on the property, I guess I should say?
Not to my knowledge. But it's, I mean, it all comes down to some of the shady practices, though.
Right. I'm sure
because there was one specifically in their records that they said escaped / died on railroad bridge. So, like, they were making a point. It seemed like as often as possible to say that, you know, if somebody escaped at least once, they were probably going to say they escaped before they died when they did die.
Yeah. But it's like at the same time, why even say that they escaped? like, how are you, like, I know that they're probably the ones that are finding the bodies, but it's like at the same time, like, kind of convenient that they are always the ones to find the bodies.
They're trying to justify it couldn't have been our fault because they weren't here when it happened.
Right.
And it
Yeah, I get
wasn't
that part,
and
but
it
it's just
wasn't
like-
always that they were the ones to find the bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Because the sheriffs were working with them and the townsfolk were working with them.
Yeah, one
Like-
kid was shot by the sheriff.
The townsfolk would actually tell their kids, you better be good or they're going to send you off to Mariana. And there was a second school grouped with this, I guess. They opened a location in Okeechobee as well.
Mm.
A while after the Mariana one opened, and I guess the Okeechobee one did have its fair share of similar practices, but the Dozier school, honestly, with the 111 years of just beating the shit out of boys and being shady with their record keeping and burying people in unmarked graves, and honestly, I was kind of amazed to find out that they actually did have girls there in the early years before they transitioned to the school for boys.
Yeah.
And the fact that they called themselves the Industrial School for Boys, like, that's when they started going, like, all right, we're going to put these guys to work. Like, the name changes line up with iconic parts of the story. Like, it was originally all genders reform school when it had good potential, and then it was just boys, but we're going to teach them how to do shit. And then it was the Dozier School, which was the peak of the abuse.
I mean, the industrial part and having them work and everything like that, I can kind of get why they would think this is a good idea. Like, let's teach these boys good trade skills. Let's reform them with, like, teaching them how to do hard work and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
If it's done legitimately and not just, like, you're not going to eat, you're not going to get any water, like, keep fucking making bricks, like, that kind of shit.
Right.
But it's like, okay, we're going to teach you how to actually work in the real world and how the real world works. And here's a job. Here's how you can do it. So then when you're of age, you can go and be in society and not be a fucking menace and, like, you know.
And they do that these days even to a certain degree. I mean, let's be real. The American prison system's not perfect.
No.
By no sense of the word. It definitely probably needs
but
some
they
help.
are
But
making,
they've,
like,
but they've
license
got
plates
prison
or
reform
mace-
programs to where they can do schooling and they can have a degree.
Right.
When they get out of
like
prison.
where Teddy works, they have a bunch of prisoners come in. They're ones that have proven that they
The good
can
boys.
be, quote unquote, trustworthy.
Right.
Like, drive to, like, they're not that far away. So, like,
They do
drive-
like work release.
work release. It's exactly what it is. And, like, they come, but if, like, anything happens, like, they go back, like, they deal with it. Like, there's certain rules that the company has to follow, that the employees of that company have to follow. Like, Teddy was telling me, like, they're not allowed to give them anything. You can't accept anything from them.
I wish that I could say that everything with the Dozier School ended well.
Oh, I know the story ends horribly.
But they're still... They've completed the Boot Hill Cemetery. They called the little property cemetery Boot Hill. It was named Boot Hill because of the boys, honestly.
Yeah.
It wasn't originally called Boot Hill, but one of the boys nicknamed it Boot Hill, and it just kind of stuck, so everybody started calling it Boot Hill. They did their investigation into that and into some other unmarked graves, and they did some archaeological digs and stuff, and they finished their report, but that doesn't really answer everything. They couldn't answer everything with that. And a lot of the White House boys and the survivors of Dozier School, because they pretty much opened it up and said, you know, if you were there, it doesn't matter. If you were there in 2009, it doesn't matter. If you were there in 1989, like, come
Same
be a
shit
part
was
of this.
happening,
And they
yeah.
do have a website. It's the official whitehouseboys.org, I believe. But they encourage, you know, if you've got a story, if you were there, if you know someone that was there, if
Just tell the story, get it out
tell
there.
the story, get it out there. And a lot of the boys, which they're all men now,
Right.
99% of them are men now. A lot of them were looking towards getting some sort of reparations because this was state-sponsored torture. And it really does kind of seem like they're trying to draw this out long enough for them to die so they don't have to pay them.
Yeah.
Jerry Cooper, like I said, he was really big gung-ho on let's get the word out there. And he just passed away, I believe, this past year, I believe. Don't quote me on that. He didn't really see anything. It took them...
They're not going to want to admit to this, that this was happening right under their fucking noses.
Right, and I believe it was actually, they did put up a memorial and they sealed the White House. They invited the White House boys out there. They put up a statue. It's, I believe, bronze statue of 3 boys. One of them's like injured in the middle and the other 2 are helping hold him up. And they sealed the doors to the White House so that no one can go in there anymore. They wanted to leave it as a reminder. And they invited a whole bunch of them out there, and the only thing that they got was an apology. And some of them were happy with the apology, and some of them were like, that's it. Like, that's it. Like,
could have given me a card? Like, well, something. Like,
there are men in the White House Boys group that discuss specifically that they still have nightmares every single night. And some of them have had their wives leave them because they've had nightmares. And
PTSD.
Very heavy PTSD in some. And in some they got beat and they didn't even care. So it's kind of, I absolutely feel bad that all of it happened. I really do. But some of them benefited and some of them didn't. At a certain point, they officially abolished them being able to spank the kids, but it doesn't mean it stopped.
Oh, no. It just means that you get more quiet about it.
Exactly.
But it's like, again, I really do think that there's favorites. There's people that buddy up to the
There was
quote-unquote
100%
teachers and whatnot.
If you had the good jobs, then you were fine. The one guy, he was... the one that I was telling you about earlier that was, like, assisting the doctor or whatever.
Yeah.
He was talking about how a lot of times he'd be, like, putting Vaseline on wounds and things like that. And it's like, okay, sure, those scars heal, and they might not have those scars now, but it doesn't mean that there weren't scars.
Right.
And you really shouldn't be beating your children to the point of scars. Legally speaking, you shouldn't be beating your children. However, I was spanked as a kid, and I'm fine.
Me too.
So this has turned into quite a long episode.
This one was a doozy, and like it was just more so telling a story of something, and there wasn't no like main character, and like
there was no main character,
but it's
because it was 111 years of characters. Bonus points to anybody that can tell me how many times Kate said whatnot in her last case. Let me know down in the question below. This was definitely a doozy. Doozy scales down below.
Yeah.
Today's question is going to be, were you spanked as a child, and do you feel that had a negative outcome on your future? I don't think it had a negative outcome on mine.
I mean, my mom only had to do it a couple of times, and I learned, hey, you just fucking hightail it, you hide your ass, and then you don't do whatever the fuck that needs.
I got spanked a lot as a kid.
Well, I was a people pleaser,
yeah.
so once I knew, it was like, can't fucking do this. See, my mom, like, she did it once for real, and then, like, she'd threaten it, so then you're like, oh, shit, I don't want this to happen again. So she just, like, calmly walk behind you as you're, like, crying and screaming, like, running to your bed, like, no, you're not gonna get my ass. And she's just, like, walking into the room, and she'll just see you sitting there, and she'll be like, I thought, and just turn around and leave, and, like, just
the intimidation,
like,
psychological warfare. Thanks, mother.
Love you, Mom. Hope you're having fun cooking.
Well, this has been the Massacre Matinee.
Yeah.
This was definitely a massacre. I'd classify it as.
Oh, yeah. Like,
yeah.
oh, my God. I hate it when kids are tortured. I hate reform schools. I really do.
I don't feel like they do any good to reform, like, as much as they're supposed to be doing. And I feel bad that the frog couldn't be here, but happy birthday to the frog.
Yeah. It's
her birthday is tomorrow, and I'm talking tomorrow in relations to recording day. So when you listen to this on Monday, it'll mean that her birthday was a couple of days ago. So feel free to say happy birthday to the frog down below as well in the question thingy. But we'll see you guys next time. Bye.